If you are a filmmaker trying to get that perfect shot, or, a surveyor mapping out a new site, maybe you're in construction, or even just a really serious hobbyist, you've definitely felt the ground shaking under our feet in this industry. I mean, we are flying into some serious turbulence right now.
That's a good way to put it.
We're facing this massive policy decision that really threatens to change the entire future of aerial tech here in the U.S.
Yeah, and this is not a small change.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
This isn't some theoretical thing about future taxes or, a minor tweak to the rules.
Right.
This is the government stepping right into the cockpit with us and telling us which tools we are and are not allowed to buy for our work. The stakes just couldn't be higher.
They really couldn't.
So our mission today here on the Deep Dive is pretty straightforward, but absolutely crucial. We've gone through all the source material you've sent us, the really dry government papers, the angry press releases from the industry, all the analysis.
Retailer reports, yeah.
Exactly. And we are going to unpack it all. The immediate policy, the huge economic fallout, and the bigger geopolitical picture behind this decision. If you use a drone for your work, you need to understand exactly what happens next.
You really do.
So, the big news, the one that's on everyone's mind, is the action taken by the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, the FCC.
And it wasn't a warning.
No, this was a direct hit, a concrete action against foreign-made drones. Basically the drones that make up, 70 or 80% of the sky right now?
At least. And that's the key thing here. It's moved past just talk and into, actual enforceable law. And we need to be really precise about the details, the date, because this is what kicked off the whole firestorm.
Okay, so let's get into it.
On December 23, 2025, the FCC took action. They officially added several companies that make foreign drones, and they specifically named the big ones, DJI, and their main competitor, Autel, to something called their covered list.
The covered list. Now, for anyone who doesn't follow DC acronyms, what does that actually mean?
Well, it's one of the most powerful tools they have to restrict technology. And this designation, it's based on a determination after this big interagency review led by the White House that these companies pose and this is the quote, unacceptable risk to U.S. national security.
So what does that mean in, practical terms? Because the FCC usually just deals with radio frequencies, not national security.
Exactly. The FCC is the enforcement arm here. Once you're on that covered list, the commission will no longer review or approve any applications for new equipment from you. So it effectively just bars the import and sale of any new models or future products from those companies into the U.S. It's basically a technological blockade on anything new they create.
And we have to, and I mean right away, make that clarification, because the drone community just went into a panic.
Total panic.
You saw people asking, is my $4,000 drone I use for my business now just a break? Is the FAA going to ground every Mavic and Phantom out there?
And the answer is absolutely not. That is the single most important practical reality we need to stress. The ban is strictly, and I really have to emphasize this, strictly forward-looking. It's about new applications for new gear.
So it doesn't affect the drones you already own?
Not at all. Whether you're a hobbyist, a filmmaker, a police department, your current fleet is safe and legal to fly.
Okay. So if you bought it last year, you can fly it. If your whole business runs on a fleet of Phantoms, those are still legal to operate. And this is a big one, it doesn't stop stores from selling the inventory they already have.
For now, yes. That's a crucial but temporary lifeline. The problem is, as the sources are showing, that existing inventory is vanishing fast.
We're seeing a run on the banks, basically.
Exactly. Retailers are selling out and they're not restocking because they know the supply chain is cut. Professionals are buying up backup units and spare parts. So while you can fly what you have, the clock has definitely started ticking on getting support, on finding parts, and on ever upgrading again. You're now running what we'd call a terminal fleet.
The terminal fleet. That's a very sobering way to put it. And that, I think, brings us right to the core of this whole mess. Let's unpack this. If we can still fly the drones we own, these incredible, affordable, high-quality machines, why is a ban on future products sending shockwaves through the entire industry? Why is it threatening jobs and causing all this friction?
To really get your head around the sheer size of this ban, you have to start with the market itself. This isn't just about banning one company. It's about trying to ban the entire technology platform that basically defines the industry.
You mean DJI's position in the market?
Exactly. The numbers are, frankly, almost hard to believe. Globally, In the commercial and prosumer world, DJI has an estimated 70% of the market.
70.
And depending on how you measure it, some sources say it's closer to 90% in certain areas, like those high-performance drones under 250 grams.
I mean, to put that in perspective for everyone listening, imagine if the government announced tomorrow that you couldn't import any new cars from, say, Toyota, Ford, and GM, and only one small, very expensive boutique car maker was left. That's the level of reliance we're talking about. They aren't just a leader. They set the standard for everything.
And their dominance didn't happen by accident. It's built on a foundation of, well, really sophisticated tech and a manufacturing scale that nobody else has even come close to.
Their R&D is just relentless.
It is. They achieve this level of vertical integration. They control the flight controller, the sensor, the gimbal, the software, everything that American and European companies just can't match at that consumer price point.
Oh, I can speak to that from the user side. Their pace of innovation was insane. We're talking about things like multi-directional obstacle avoidance, these super stable gimbals, reliable long-range transmission like AGCM,
all integrated seamlessly.
And the flight modes, active track, quick shot. These things make complex shots accessible to everyone. If you wanted to shoot cinematic 4K video on a tiny drone that flew for 30 minutes and cost less than $1,000,
there was only one option.
It was the only game in town. Their products became the standard for everything from Hollywood to, inspecting a roof.
That integration you mentioned is so key. You're buying one optimized system. With some of the domestic alternatives, you're often getting a flight controller from one company, a camera from another. It adds complexity, weight, and a ton of cost.
Yeah.
And that's the core reason this ban is so devastatingly disruptive.
And this all translates directly to the U.S. market, which is why it hurts so much.
It does. The data shows that DJI sells over half of all commercial drones here in the U.S. And honestly, that number feels low. In the under $5,000 category, it's way higher.
So you're talking about everyone. The small-town real estate photographer with a Mini 3 Pro, the farmer checking crops with a Mavic 3, the big construction company with a Matrix.
It became the standard tool because it delivered the best value, period.
And it's not just the drone itself, is it? It's the whole ecosystem they built. A repair network, parts everywhere, software that just worked, and this huge community you could turn to for help. When you cut off the main supply, you don't just lose the next drone. You threaten every single business that was built on that reliable, affordable platform.
You create a domino effect. Think about insurance. If your insurance company knows your fleet is now terminal, as we said, that parts are drying up.
Oh, yeah.
Does that affect your liability coverage? Do your premiums go up? The instability this creates goes way beyond just buying a new piece of gear.
So the irony here is that by being so good, so competitive, and so affordable, they basically created a strategic weakness for the U.S. market.
In a way, yes. The reliance itself became the vulnerability that's now being interpreted as a security risk simply because of where the company is based.
It brings us right back to the central fight here. It raises the big question. If they are so dominant and their products are so useful for everyone from filmmakers to firefighters, what are the specific concerns that the U.S. government has? What led to such a drastic move? We have to look at the other side, national security.
Right. Let's lay out the official government line first. This comes from that White House review, so it's not just the FCC, it's the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Commerce. They're all aligned on this.
Okay.
The first major concern you always hear about is the risk of unauthorized surveillance. The idea that these devices with these incredible cameras could be used by a foreign government for spying.
Monitoring critical infrastructure, mapping military bases, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And the fear isn't necessarily that someone in another country is remotely flying a hobbyist's drone. It's more that the platform itself, the software, the GPS logs, could be tapped into if that drone flies near something sensitive.
It's a flying, networked, high-res camera.
And that network is controlled from offshore, which leads to the second big concern, and this one hits closer to home for users. Sensitive data exfiltration.
The fear that your flight logs, your photos, your videos are being sent back to servers in another country.
Right. And those servers could be subject to laws that compel the company to share that data with their government. We have to be clear about two different risks here, because they often get blurred.
What are they?
There's the risk of a deliberate, malicious backdoor built into the system for spying. And then there's the risk of what's called jurisdictional data access.
Okay, what's the difference?
Jurisdictional access just means that even if the company stores your data securely, that data is still subject to the laws of the country where the servers are. So a foreign government could legally demand access to it. For a business handling sensitive client data, that's a huge problem.
That's a critical distinction. So
Sure.
even if the company has the best intentions, if their government can just demand the flight logs for, say, all the critical infrastructure sites in Texas, that's a massive vulnerability right there.
It is. And the final piece is the supply chain vulnerability.
Hmm?
When one foreign company controls the parts, the software, the firmware updates for almost the entire market, that creates a systemic risk.
A malicious update could be pushed out, or a compromised chip could be installed during manufacturing.
And the impact would be widespread, hitting civilian and government operations all at once. The reliance itself is the risk.
Okay, so that's the official security position. But we wouldn't be doing a deep dive if we just stopped there. We have to talk about the pushback from the industry, which is calling this whole thing protectionism.
Right. And DJI has been very forceful in their response. Their main point, to paraphrase their statements, is that these security concerns have not been grounded in evidence that anyone can actually see or challenge publicly.
So they're saying there's no proof.
They're saying the government hasn't provided any, and they argue this is really an economic move to protect less competitive domestic drone makers, the ones on the approved Blue UAS list, who just can't compete on price or performance.
So using national security as a cover for a trade barrier.
That's the argument. And this is where it gets really murky, because the sources are clear that the U.S. government has released, and I'm quoting here, no information regarding what information was used by the executive branch.
Zero transparency.
None. And that lack of transparency is what fuels the whole protectionism debate.
It's a huge political problem. The government is basically saying, trust us, the classified risk is real, while at the same time asking American businesses to absorb billions in economic damage based on secrets they can't share.
And that narrative gets even stronger when users see the massive quality and price gap between the banned drones and the domestic alternatives. Their logical conclusion is that U.S. companies just can't compete, so the government is clearing the field for them.
So where it gets really interesting is what this all means for the people actually using these tools every single day. Let's move from the policy debate to the real-world fallout for small businesses, for public safety, and for the U.S. economy.
Yes, we have to talk about the actual dollars and jobs. The economic stakes here are just immense. The source material shows that the service is powered by these drones.
So not the drones themselves, but the work done with them.
Exactly. That work supports an estimated $116 billion in U.S. economic activity.
Wow.
And that's everything from making construction more efficient, to inspecting pipelines, to processing insurance claims faster after a storm, to precision agriculture. And all that activity supports over 450,000 American jobs.
$116 billion. And that number highlights a key point. If you cut off the supply of affordable, reliable drones, that economic activity doesn't just switch over to domestic brands.
A huge piece of it just disappears.
Right. If a construction firm suddenly has to pay 3 times more for a drone that's less reliable, they might just go back to the old, slower, more dangerous manual methods. The productivity gain is lost.
And that loss hits the smallest businesses the hardest. We have survey data that paints a really grim picture. A recent survey found that 67% of American small drone service businesses, two-thirds of them, they say they would be forced to close if the supply for DJI was completely cut off and they couldn't find an affordable replacement.
So you're a small business. You're already dealing with insurance regulations. And now the main tool you use for your job is a security risk. And the only approved alternatives cost 4 times as much.
For most of them, that's just an insurmountable cost. It's a massive risk of market failure, driven entirely by a policy that doesn't account for them.
Okay, now let's shift from small businesses to public safety, because this is where the crisis gets even more intense. Their budgets are fixed.
And the reliance is even more concentrated. In many states, DJI drones make up a staggering 80 to 95% of all the operational units for police, fire departments, and search and rescue teams.
80 to 95%.
And they're using them for critical, life-saving work. Flying thermal cameras over a collapsed building to find survivors, mapping a wildfire, accident reconstruction, locating a missing person at night.
These aren't toys. They're essential equipment that became the standard because they were reliable and easy to use.
And the crisis comes down to the prohibitive cost of switching. As we said, the U.S.-made alternatives often cost 3 to 4 times more than a comparable DJI model.
Let's use a real example to make that clear.
The source material gives a brutal one. The difference between a high-performing DJI drone that a small department can afford, maybe around $2,600,
Yeah.
versus a compliant U.S.-made replacement that costs $15,000 or more.
Okay, but let's push back on that a little. Aren't some of those U.S. drones more advanced, with better AI or encrypted data links that might justify some of that cost?
That's a fair point. Some of the compliant drones are superior in specific areas, especially autonomous flight. But the feedback you get from a fire chief is practical.
Right.
They'll say, I don't need a $15,000 drone with military-grade encryption to see a hot spot in a brush fire. I need a $3,000 drone that's reliable, easy to train new people on, and can be replaced if it crashes without breaking my budget.
So a small department that budgeted for, say, 3 of those drones, a manageable $8,000 or so, now needs to find an extra $30,000 just to have the same basic capability.
And for a small town, that money just isn't there, which means they either ground their drone program or they don't start one. Critical life-saving programs just stop because of budget constraints created by this policy.
And that is the uncomfortable reality. The policy has a high-level goal, but the cost is pushed down to the local agencies and small businesses who can least afford it.
Which takes us right to the biggest flaw in the policy itself, what we're calling the unaddressed sting. The fact that it's a policy without a plan.
Right.
This is what the source material brings up over and over again. The failure here isn't necessarily identifying a security risk. The failure is the complete and total disconnect between the economic harm the ban creates
And
the absolute absence of any plan to help people deal with it.
no financial help, no compensation, no transition strategy for the thousands of businesses and public safety teams that are being hurt by this. And I think we need to contrast that with the insane amount of money the U.S. government does have for other things, especially defense, which is the whole reason for the ban.
Yeah, the scale is important here.
Think about it. The 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, authorizes a record $901 billion in annual military spending.
Nearly $1 trillion.
$1 trillion. And if you look specifically at cyber operations, the thing this ban is supposed to be about, the Pentagon's funding for that alone is $15.1 billion.
The contrast is just, it's jarring. You have hundreds of billions for defense, but not a single dollar allocated to fix the market disruption that this very policy created.
It really tells you about the priorities, or maybe just the lack of planning. The policy says, stop using these tools for security reasons, but offers zero help to buy the new tools. It's basically telling the small fire department, figure it out or shut down.
And to fix the public safety problem, we're talking about a few $100 million. It's a rounding error in the NDAA budget. The cost of compliance was just pushed entirely onto the users.
But the sources do offer some concrete, common-sense solutions that could make this whole thing fairer and more effective.
They do. The first and most obvious one is transition grants and tax incentives for small businesses. A grant program to help cover that huge cost difference between the old drone and the new compliant one.
So the small surveyor can stay in business without going into massive debt.
Exactly. And another one for public safety is subsidized procurement. The federal government should offer matching funds cover 50 or 75% of the cost to help police and fire departments buy the approved drones.
A drone transition fund. That would be a clear signal that the government is actually partnering with local agencies instead of just giving them orders.
And the third, and maybe the most important one long term, is to actually invest in domestic innovation, not just restriction.
Right. Don't just ban the competition. Help your own team get better.
A ban is a short-term fix. Real independence means funding R&D and helping U.S. companies actually scale up so they can compete on price. If your only strategy is to remove the leader, you're left with high costs and a sheltered industry that never learns to compete globally.
So if we connect all this to the bigger picture, the U.S. policy looks kind of reactive, especially when you see what the European Union is doing. They've taken a completely different path. And it's worth asking what we can learn from their strategy.
Yeah, the difference between the U.S. and the EU is one of the most interesting parts of this whole story. It's two totally different philosophies for dealing with the exact same challenge.
They both see the market dominance. They both see the potential risks. But their responses couldn't be more different.
The U.S. chose prohibition, an outright ban based on national origin. The EU, on the other hand, is using regulation and competition.
And you see that really clearly with what's happening in Italy, right? Their competition authority opened an investigation into DJI.
They did. But they're not investigating national security or data risks. They're investigating something called resale price maintenance, or RPM.
Okay, what is that?
It's a business practice where the manufacturer pressures stores to sell their products at a fixed minimum price. It's against EU competition rules because it kills competition and makes it harder for smaller brands to compete by offering lower prices.
So the EU is focused on the company's behavior in the market, not its country of origin.
Exactly. They're saying, you can sell here, but you have to play by our market rules, which are designed to protect consumers and help smaller competitors grow.
That's a huge difference. They get to keep the benefits of the advanced, affordable technology while using their own laws to manage the market.
At the same time, they're building up their own defenses. They've proposed this incredibly ambitious thing called the European Drone Defense Initiative, basically a continent-wide drone wall.
A drone wall. What does that actually look like? Is it just a bunch of anti-drone defenses?
It's way more sophisticated. It's a massive integrated network of sensors, jammers, and weapons designed to detect and stop any hostile drone, no matter where it came from.
So they're building a shield.
A very smart shield. The key is that it protects their airspace regardless of what commercial drones people are flying. The defense is strong enough to handle the risk, so the commercial market can stay open and competitive.
So to sum it up, the EU is building up its own defenses and enforcing market competition. The U.S. chose a ban that's causing huge economic disruption.
The assumption in the U.S. seems to be that if you ban the leader, domestic companies will magically catch up. The EU seems to think that a competitive market, combined with a strong defense, is the better long-term play.
Which brings us to the most immediate question for everyone listening. What do you do with the gear you have in your bag right now? How do you navigate this?
Right, let's get practical.
Let's bring it right back down to earth. And we need to say this again because the fear is real. Your existing drones are not grounded. You can still fly them legally for your business, for fun, whatever.
That is the single most important fact. Don't panic and sell your gear. But you do need to prepare because that supply chain for new parts is now frozen.
So what are the steps to take?
The first and most urgent is to get your hands on essential spare parts now while you still can. If you rely on a specific drone for your work, you need to be buying extra batteries.
Oh yeah, batteries.
Propellers, maybe a spare gimbal component, things that are proprietary and will be impossible to find later.
Batteries are the big one.
Yeah.
They have a limited lifespan. And once the official ones are gone, you're looking at the gray market, which is a huge risk for flight safety.
A huge risk. Second, make sure your firmware is up to date. Get your drones to the most stable, secure state they can be in right now, because it's very likely that official updates and bug fixes are going to become rare, or stop completely.
You want to lock in the best performance now, while you still can. Basically, maximize the life of the investment you've already made.
Exactly. The long-term reality is that the search for affordable alternatives, especially in that workhorse sub-$3,000 market, is going to be tough.
U.S. companies like Skydio have pivoted to high-end government and enterprise work. They're not really making a $2,000 drone for the average small business.
And that highlights the gap. Domestic companies are great at specific things like data security or autonomous flight, but they can't yet match the cost, battery life, or camera quality that came from that massive global scale.
We're seeing new drones, like the anti-gravity A1, which is a good sign. But they have a huge gap to close in quality and price.
For the next few years, professionals are going to be relying on their existing fleets and the spare parts they can stockpile. That's just the reality until either a domestic alternative becomes truly competitive or the policy changes.
So to wrap it up, the ban is this direct clash between national security policy and our technological reliance. And the next few years are going to be the real test.
Will this ban actually spark a competitive domestic industry? Or will it just limit choice, drive up costs for small businesses and first responders, and ultimately slow down American innovation in this space? That is the high-stakes question we're all watching unfold.
So the sting of this policy, as we've talked about, isn't just the ban itself. It's the complete lack of accountability, the absence of any plan to support the small businesses and public services that are being hurt by this move. We've laid out how there are hundreds of billions for defense, but not a single dollar budgeted to fix the economic damage this has caused in the drone world. And right now, the price for that is being paid by the smallest players in the market.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to consider, especially when you think about the European approach. We've compared the U.S. strategy of prohibition with the EU's strategy of regulation and building up their own defenses.
Right.
So here's the question. Will forcing the American market to restrict its choice actually drive innovation? Will it create a new competitive domestic champion that can match the global giants on scale and cost? Or will it simply raise costs, limit the tools available to American creators and inspectors, and cause us to fall behind other global markets like the EU, who still have access to the best global technology while they focus their own money on building a robust, independent defense? The answer to that is going to define the next decade of this industry.
That is the trillion-dollar question hanging over every single professional in this industry. If you found this discussion valuable, please help Jolly Roger Aerial Photography grow. Subscribe to our channel for more in-depth content like this. Give this video a like, leave a comment with your thoughts on the ban, especially how it affects your specific business or hobby, and share it with anyone who flies a drone. Your feedback helps us determine where to focus our next deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. Fly safe and be prepared.